throughout history, revolutions and wars all begin in the spring, at least on average, where at one point in the Middle Ages, it would just be known that the springtime was the wartime, and that was just the time to send the knights out and go,
This is how we fight our wars now.
Yeah.
With angry liberals holding signs and banners blocking
Pretty
traffic.
much.
Hey folks, welcome to The Drink Tank, the newest production from The Unusual Suspects. I'm Connor Walcott, staff writer for VT.com. Sitting across from me is my fellow writer, Shane Devine. We are in the beautiful Valuetainment Cigar Lounge and Bar today to give you hot takes and cold drinks with your favorite suspects. So today we are going to be talking about the protests going on college campuses right now. Everything is going nuts. All the biggest universities in the country are facing mass protests unlike anything we've seen since 2020 when BLM protesters took over everything. So we've done a little bit of digging, and it turns out this actually goes a lot deeper than you might think. So Shane, what do you have for us?
Yeah, so I think it's established narrative right now on the right that these protests look like they could be the protests to take us to the 24 election. We're all waiting for what it was going to be. Was it going to be a new virus? Was it going to be a cyber attack? I think it very well could be these protests because it captures the decolonized movement, which, while it's about Palestine and Israel right now, it could easily become about the United States and harken back to the land back movement, which we saw after the 2020 Floyd riots, where basically they were saying America needs to give its lands back to the native peoples, who are, just chilling in casinos right now. It's not really like we can give anything back, but if we want to turn the whole country into even more of a casino than it already is, I guess that would work.
Every boomer who goes to a casino gives plenty back with quarters and slot machines, but
that's right.
That's neither here nor there, I guess.
That's the whole VA bill.
Yeah.
But so, anyways, these protests they start at Columbia University, which is a hotbed for Marxist activity, famously harbored the Frankfurt School when they fled Nazi Germany, and they came to the U.S. Max Horkheimer and Theodore Adorno taught there, and Herbert Marcuse did as well. Marcuse famously worked for the OSS, which is an interesting little fact, the precursor to the CIA.
And if I'm remembering correctly, didn't Columbia also have these giant protests in like the 60s, anti-Vietnam, then later calling for divestment from South Africa?
Yep.
So this is a hotbed for angry liberal college students.
Yeah, so Columbia has been kind of organizing student activists since the beginning, and now they started off these pro-Palestine protests. The war's been going on since October, so it's like, why now? And it was kind of slow in the winter. They got up to, I think, 20,000 deaths, but then everything stopped as Israel prepared for its ground invasion of the south of Gaza. So I think what really kicked this off is an internal left-wing push to attack the very notion of Israeli statehood rather than a response to anything necessarily going on right now in Gaza. The only thing going on right now is a proxy war between us and Iran through Israel. And Israel killed one of Iran's top generals, the highest ranking official to be killed yet in the war, a few weeks ago when it struck a consulate in Syria. It also killed the children of one of the Hamas political leaders. So that's really all that's going on right now. But the students are saying Israel should not exist. It should not even be allowed to exist because it's inherently illegitimate as a state. It's taken these lands from these indigenous people. And these protests have spread out to the entirety of the U.S. Emory in Georgia, University of Texas at Austin, Berkeley in California, Yale, Harvard. I saw some in Ohio. I saw some in Michigan. I think Minnesota as well.
Several dozen schools so far, but what you just mentioned, like you walked us through, all the stuff that happened since October in the Middle East, the war between Israel and Hamas, the way Iran got involved just recently. What's the connection that gets all this stuff happening in a desert halfway across the world to college campuses? Why now? And, I genuinely think the reason we didn't see it happen before now on college campuses is that it was cold in New York up until a few weeks ago.
Good point, yeah.
And now all of a sudden that it's warm and it's springtime and we're ramping up into election season, suddenly every liberal student has developed the burning need to take a stand on behalf of the suffering Palestinians. But why?
Yeah.
Why does that make any sense?
Well, so there's two parts to that. One is just like you said, it's just the warm weather and people like to go outside and cause havoc when things are nice. Throughout history, revolutions and wars all begin in the spring, at least on average, where at one point in the Middle Ages, it would just be known that the springtime was the wartime, and that was just the time to send the knights out and go,
This is how we fight our wars now.
Yeah.
With angry liberals holding signs and banners blocking
Pretty
traffic.
much. So like the point about why this war happening out in the Middle East is affecting here. Well, obviously we've been meddling in Middle Eastern affairs since World War II, and Israel and us have gone back and forth of who's really in charge of this whole thing. Some say Israel's in charge of us. Some say we're in charge of Israel, and we use it as an aircraft carrier into the Middle East. It's never quite clear which one is the case, but either way, we're involved. But the students don't really care necessarily about our foreign policy against China or against Russia, which is what is different about these protests compared to the Cold War, where some students literally did take up the side of the USSR against the US, being ardent communists. The difference with these protesters is that they are not state communists in the mold of Lenin. They are anarcho-communists who want to disassemble all states and want to disassemble all imperial powers. They also view the USSR as an imperial power. So what's different here is Palestine liberation isn't just, they're not actually pro-Hamas. I know the joke is like, oh, queers for Palestine, that's absurd. Hamas is radical Islamist terrorists, whatever. They're not really pro-Hamas. What they are is pro-third worldist, which is a Maoist movement that wants to just overthrow the entirety of the so-called colonial project over the third world. And Palestine is right now their locus of activity to start this mass conflagration that will set off this global revolution.
I think it's a very interesting commentary on how the left generally views power dynamics, and that because they believe that power is always bad, with the exception of when they have it, but they always believe that whoever has the most power is evil. Therefore, whoever does not have power must be good.
Oppressor versus oppressed.
It's all about power dynamics and the oppressor and the colonized and all that. So Israel, despite being a very small country, is more powerful, and whether that's for divine intervention, American military support, or just the fact that they've built up a strong military.
Yeah.
You can debate whichever reason for sure. They worked hard to achieve a position where they are now a power in the region. The Palestinians, by contrast, are very weak, despite the fact that they frequently kill Israelis.
And despite the fact that they have backing from the most powerful radical Islamic country in the world, which is Iran.
Iran just wants them to be its weapon to take out its enemies. But because the Palestinians, at least on paper, are weaker, all the liberals are fully on board with supporting them.
Right.
It doesn't matter what else they've done.
There's also objectively a racial element to this, where it's like no matter what, if the people on the other side are somewhat white, then they're obviously in the wrong.
Yeah,
like what we were talking about with Ireland, where Ireland is seen as being in the wrong to be in control of its own immigration policy, even though Ireland never colonized anyone. And in fact was colonized itself for thousands of years, or maybe hundreds of years.
Yeah, probably close to thousands at this point.
So
damn the British.
Damn the British and the Romans, probably.
Yeah, them too.
Yeah, so, but, you don't have the same animosity against non-white countries when they engage in colonialism and slavery. It always goes back to this oppressor versus oppressed narrative, which they very conveniently map on racial lines, even when those lines aren't actually so clear cut.
Yeah, and case in point, why have there been no college campus demonstrations for Ukraine? There's nobody calling for, well, we must divest from Russia.
Yeah.
First of all, I don't think any of them have remaining investments in Russia, except for the ones that got taken over by communists during the Cold War, but
Right.
whatever. But nobody stumped for Ukraine quite the same way.
Well, because Ukraine is a corporate war.
Yeah, and also Ukraine is white.
Right, that too.
Like you can't rally people around a corporate war on behalf of white people against white people.
Yeah.
You have to have evil white people are coming into a non-white country. And of course, nobody around the world can really figure out whether Jews are supposed to be white or not.
Right.
They've never really figured it out, but
They can't figure it out either.
yeah, Jews can't also make that determination.
But the thing is, so as we were saying, the tents in all these protests are so uniform, no matter where you
Yeah.
look. And a lot of the groups that are organizing these protests are, student justice?
Students for Justice in Palestine. This gets to the point. What you
Right.
mentioned is that if you look at the footage across all these campuses, most of the tents are identical. I don't know when the last time you went camping was, but if you look around the campground, do you see identical tents
No.
everywhere?
Just diverse.
Yeah, the only time you see the same tents are when it's within a family that bought all the tents at the same time. So when you see a few hundred people camping out on the lawn of a college with identical tents, that means all the tents were bought at the same time.
It's like the feds in Virginia, all
Exactly.
wearing the same khaki pants.
Patriot Front in the same ironed khakis and masks, and yet we never see the masks taken off when they're arrested. But when you walk through all that and you see how similar they are, it really flies in the face of what they want to tell you about how organic and grassroots this movement is. So I guess let's try to walk that back then.
Yeah.
Let's see where this road takes us. As you mentioned, most of these groups are a part of, is it Columbia, the Columbia University Apartheid Divest Movement, which is
Beautiful mouthful.
Yeah, a bit, or QUAD, we'll call them, like that's the acronym they go by.
Okay.
CUAD, which does not spell quad, but sure, whatever. Higher education, folks.
Right.
CUAD is an umbrella group that has a bunch of different organizations underneath it. One of them being Students for Justice in Palestine. This is a national movement that has chapters on most college campuses. They're the ones who always stump for these things, and it's been around since long before October 7th. So where does that group come from? That group is funded by the Westchester's People Action Coalition, or WestPAC, which is a big group that gives out money to a bunch of anti-Israel, pro-Palestine organizations, including another group that often ships in agitators to make these protests more violent. And Democrats swear that they're not affiliated. The Students for Justice for Palestine are being peaceful, and then the other group within our lifetime, they're the ones who are violent.
Right.
But they're both funded by the same nonprofit.
You make a good point right there, that a lot of these protesters involved on these campuses aren't even students. They're literally shipped in from elsewhere. I know a few on Twitter that I've followed who are like 30-year-old Brooklyn Marxist people just showing up to Columbia and getting on their soapbox and talking to them like...
You know, because they don't have a job to
No.
go do during the day, so
They
they
just do
hang,
acid all day.
hang out with angry college kids. So WestPAC are the ones who fund, within our lifetimes, the ones who fund Students for Justice for Palestine. But who funds WestPAC? Well, if we kick it one level higher, we get to an organization called the Tides Center, which I believe you've done a little bit of research into.
Yeah, Tides is huge. It's one of the biggest, wealthiest left-wing institutions in the country. They're based in D.C. I believe they were established by a guy named Drummond Pike, who's still behind the scenes. And they take money from all of these foundations like Kellogg, MacArthur, Hewlett, and all of these funders, and Ford. It's so weird because all these funders, they're the last names of prominent American capitalists who either are from the Gilded Age or the mid-20th century.
Like, these are the people who built America.
Built modern America.
Established
built
the economy
corporate
the way it
America.
is.
So it's,
yeah.
why are they funding this? Well, it's not them funding it. Their institutions, their philanthropies that they set up to do good in the world after they passed have been hijacked by Columbia-educated radical progressives who have no other job opportunities than to be in philanthropy, where they just decide to send money that they didn't make themselves to causes that will undermine the ability for anyone else to ever make money ever again.
Yeah. It's crazy, the pipeline from these organizations pump money into colleges that churn out crazy liberals that graduate and take over the organizations
Take over
to
the
pump more money
philanthropies, yes.
into the universities.
Put more ideology out there.
It's one gigantic liberal circle jerk all the way around. And
where does that lead to the top?
where does that lead? Okay, so Tide Center, as we've established, kicks all this money down the pipeline. But who funds the Tide Center? As you said, there's all those names that give money to it. But perhaps the biggest donor to that organization is the Open Society Foundation, which, as anyone who's dialed in enough to watch this show will know, is the political action arm of none other than George Soros.
Georgi Schwartz.
Yeah. So George Soros sits at the top of this whole thing, kicking money all the way down that winds up in the hands of people who are buying tents and shipping pallets of bricks to angry pro-Palestine college students.
Yeah, coming to a town near you.
Yeah. But that raises a very important question. George Soros is notably a Jewish billionaire. Why is he so heavily invested in these anti-Israel protests on college campuses?
I mean, Vinny asked me this too.
Yeah.
You want to know my take?
I'd love to.
So basically, you have a guy who cares more about globalism than his own Judaism. And all he identifies in his own Judaism is this phrase, tikkun olam. I'm probably butchering that pronunciation, but it means basically improve the world. And this is such a joke among conservative Jews that they make fun of Western Jews when they come to Israel. They say, "How do you say tikkun olam in Israeli or in Hebrew?" So it's like, you know, they don't even, they say it so often they don't even know it's a Hebrew word because they're so not in connection with their own Jewish roots. This is the only word that they know.
It's like intifada with the
exactly.
the liberals.
Like they're wearing the keffiyeh or whatever.
They wear the headscarf with no idea what it
headscarf.
means. They hold up the watermelons, not
So
knowing what
stupid.
those represent.
They're like wearing Saudi crown prince headgear, trying to like
I'm with
connect
Palestine.
with
That's not
the
Palestinian,
working class.
but whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, Soros is, you could say, an uncultured Jew or a disconnected one who doesn't really understand his own culture or religion or his people. Many would say this is why he was fine with turning his people in during the Holocaust to escape from Hungary. And his number one goal in life is to institute a one world government with no borders that people like him can control from above. Tucker Carlson just did an interview with a Russian philosopher named Alexander Dugin. And Dugin made this point that in the current age, democracy or liberalism is no longer about majority rule, which it used to be. That was its calling card against fascism and communism in the 20th century. Today, liberalism is all about minority rights. So against the majority. The majority is bad. They can elect populists like Donald Trump. We need to be...
God forbid we have someone the people actually like who represents them. It must be special interests only.
So we need to instead just have an elite of people who know better than us, like Soros. And Soros, who, his real name is Schwartz, but he changed it to an Esperanto word that means to soar. So Soros isn't even his real name. Esperanto is a language that was created by globalists to try to create a one world language, which is literally the Tower of Babel.
Yeah. And we saw how that went the first time. If anyone who's read the Bible would know
3
that.
pages into the Bible. So you just have a guy who his whole life has just been about reading Karl Popper and worshiping the Open Society and changing his name to an Esperanto name. And he doesn't really give a crap what his origin is or his race is or anything. His one goal is this, and he will achieve it unless people see through it.
Of course, and my read on it is related. Like that's Soros' personal motivation, but it also has a lot to do with sort of revealing to everybody that this is not about Israel and Palestine. Doesn't matter what's on the banners or what flags they're flying. Israel and Palestine are secondary issues. It is about being anti-Western. It is about destroying the United States and the Western culture more broadly, because they don't really care what movement they use. It's why the same people who were out in Black Bloc for the BLM riots in 2020 are now putting on headscarves and flying Palestinian flags today. It's
Yeah.
the same people.
It's also not about human rights.
It has
because
nothing to do with human
they
rights
don't care
either.
about the human rights abuses of Muslim majority nations when they commit them.
Of course
do you
not.
see them out in droves when Pakistan does what they do, or Saudi Arabia does what they do, or Iran does what they do?
I mean,
Like,
India and Pakistan have been at war for a very long time,
Mm-hmm.
and in their border skirmishes, people stab each other to death with swords and ice picks because they don't even have modern weaponry in a lot of those conflicts. Nobody cares about that
Mm-hmm.
because it's the one specific issue, because internationally, Israel is regarded as a Western client state.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why when they want to take down Israel, it's about the West. And you've seen in the videos where they've talked to these campus protesters, they don't know why they're there.
yeah,
But the few that do know why they're there are talking about things that really don't have much to do with Israel. They're talking about,
Apartheid.
yeah, we want to dismantle apartheid and systemic racism and dismantle the colonialist system, which is anti-Western, anti-white rhetoric. They don't care about Israel. Israel could cease to exist tomorrow,
it's just the
and
latest thing.
they'd still be there. It's,
Right.
it's the new thing, because nothing is ever enough for these people.
Exactly. And that is precisely why it could become the calling card issue for the 24 election, because it doesn't have anything to do with Israel as itself or Palestine itself. It has to do with America and with our government.
They haven't found a new George Floyd, so instead they outsourced it internationally and landed in the Middle East, and that's where they're going to stay. But even beyond that, it goes off of college campuses as well. You just saw a few weeks ago the protesters that shut down the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco.
Right?
That's a whole other thing that leads, again, straight up the pipeline back to George Soros. The group that organized the bridge shutdown was A15 Action. A15 for April 15th, which was the date they coordinated that protest, with ones in Chicago and New York and a bunch of other cities. So a bunch of people got arrested during those things. It took hours, which is ridiculous. You should be arrested 5 minutes after you start blocking traffic. That's obviously a crime. It just
Or in
shows
Panama, you get a
Yeah.
boomer getting out of his car and shooting you.
one guy shot 2 people, and whatever happened to that guy?
I don't
We
know.
never found out.
We gotta follow up.
That's something worth looking into.
Yeah.
But all those people got arrested. So A15 set up a fundraiser to pay their bail. That was done through Act Blue Charities, which anybody who's followed stuff since the BLM riots knows that Act Blue is a major Democratic fundraiser.
They started that in 2016 after Hillary lost, by the
Yeah,
way.
where the goal is just, this is a fundraising page that collects money and distributes it out to different left-wing organizations. BLM used to launder its donations to the Democratic Party through Act Blue. You know, people would give money to BLM, that donation would be submitted to Act Blue, then it would go to the Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden campaign. That was a whole big scandal that no one was ever held accountable for. But Act Blue, on behalf of A15, would then give those donations to a group called the Community Justice Exchange, which would then use that money to pay for A15 protesters to get bailed out, put them back on the streets, so we'll see them again the next time they plan a giant protest like that. But the Community Justice Exchange was created by the Tides Center, which, as we've established, is funded by the Open Society Foundation and George Soros. So even off the college campuses, it traces back to the exact same people. It's the same key players over and over again. And yet, for some reason, nobody seems to make these connections, so we just keep letting this happen over and over and over again.
It's insane.
Yeah.
You
So
wanna wrap it up?
If I gotta summarize here, I'll pull out my napkin and try to draw a flow chart of this. So we got Soros at the top. We go down, Open Society Foundation. That leads down into Tides. Then from there goes into Westpac. Then that splits off into all the different college outlets and organizations. And together, with ones funded by the Open Society Foundation, other groups funded by Tides, that leads us to the college protests that we see today. And that is what's going on America's college campuses. These are the people they want you at home to pay for. They want to take your money and use them to pay for their college loans. They go there, they squander their own money and their parents' money, and then get classes canceled by engaging in these protests. And then, as soon as they graduate, we'll say, oh, we're so burdened by these student loan debts, And the ones that don't get jobs
Don't
sitting...
you want us to contribute
Yeah.
to the economy?
The ones that don't get jobs sitting on the boards of all the corporations that funded the protesters in the first place will just continue to take our money.
But they're doing good, so.
Yeah. But on that note, the drinks are just about empty, time's just about up, and I think that will do it for today. So thank you guys for joining us. We hope to see you back here again soon.
And if you have any stories for us to investigate, reach out to us on Monect, and we write on VT.com. So go there for all articles and reports on all this stuff.
All this and a lot more, VT.com. Help us out. Check out our writing. I think it's pretty good, but we'll let you guys be the judge of that.
It's okay.
And we will be back again next week. New lineup of suspects, new drinks brought to us by the fabulous producer Kelly, and we will see you next time. See you later.